We're saying these are multiple traditions. They're all speaking, to a similar text, and they're all hearing different things, right? And so what we do is that they create this orchestra, right? Or what we call contrapuntalism. So what they do is that they create the sound of notes playing against each other, but it produces a nice sound. So all these perspectives start, sharpening each other. Iron sharpens iron.
Dynamic biblical discussions with special guests exploring tough biblical issues, academic scholarship, ethics, archaeology, textual criticism, Old Testament, New Testament, Bible interpretation, apocalyptic literature, Christian history, ancient Near East cultures. You're tuned in to Conversations with Pastor Cliff on Blose Ministries.
Good day, everybody. Welcome back to yet another episode on Blose Ministries on Conversations with Pastor Cliff. Today we have an awesome guest, and his name is Blose. And Stu is quite a close friend of mine. We went to the same university, and he likes, this whole thing of Bible interpretation. So we're going to ask him how he got into that, and what sort of prompted him to eventually find himself being a PhD candidate in the field of biblical interpretation. So he's going to tell us how we should read our Bibles and interpret them. Welcome, Blose, onto Blose Ministries.
Thank you, Pastor Cliff, and thanks to your viewers and your followers and subscribers. And thanks for having me here. It's a privilege and an honor to be here.
Awesome. We're glad to have you here. I know you and I have had chats about Bible interpretation. And, many of our audience may not know this, but we've had, awesome conversations in the background. So maybe today we can tell them a little bit more onto how you actually got into this, field of Bible interpretation. What prompted you?
Right. So one, by the time we end this conversation, I want everyone to, I want to sell biblical interpretation to everyone, and I want them to become Bible interpreters, which they already are. They just didn't know it. And I think that's also one of the reasons why I got into biblical interpretation, precisely because it's so ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's something that we do. It comes naturally to all of us, even though we don't know what it is. So I got into it because it's the easiest of the theology disciplines. But maybe at a more personal level, I got into it because I think engaging with popular and, interpretations of the Bible, I realized some of them were a bit alienating, and many of them were marked by a very clear silence and absence of voices from where I come from my people, they missed and they lacked the perspectives of my people. The only time you ever hear sort of like an interpretation that sort of resonates or acknowledges where I come from or the perspectives that I grew up with is on the pulpit, but never really in academic writings, academic circles. So I thought, man, let me just get into this and cause some chaos and see where it takes us.
Chaos. Okay. I like that.
Yeah.
Tell me, what is hermeneutics? For many of our audiences may not know what this term means. Could you sort of define it and tell them basically what it is?
Okay, so I'm gonna, like I said, because my intention here is to sell this thing, right? And I want people to fall in love with it and to know what they're doing, to know that they're doing it every single day. Yeah. So hermeneutics, and I'll give you an illustration, is basically it's an art, the art of interpretation. Others call it science, others call it an art of interpretation, right? So what interpretation requires is that there be either a subject or an object that is being viewed and interpreted for understanding and for various other purposes in order to understand it and to engage with it, right? And what interpretation does and what that does is that there's an outcome to that. So you're viewing something to understand it, you make sense of it, and there's an outcome of that. What are the implications of that, right? So as you see, we do it every single day. And to give you an illustration, I'll give you an illustration of this lady who's at her sink in the kitchen, right, washing dishes. She looks across to her neighbor's kitchen window, right, her neighbor, and she sees that her neighbor's kitchen curtains are dirty, the curtains that are covering the kitchen window. And so she says to her husband, she remarks to her husband and says, Mrs. Cliff's curtains are very dirty, right? And the husband goes, and he nods and he grunts and he walks away. And she repeats that statement again the following day. She says, Mrs. Cliff's, curtains are extremely dirty. I wonder why she doesn't wash them, right? And the husband grunts and walks away. The third day, she repeats the same thing. She says, Mrs. Cliff's curtains are dirty. I wonder if she's so, why is she so comfortable living with such curtains, The husband grunts and walks away. The fourth day, she says the same thing. And this time she says, I wonder what her husband says, How does he feel even marrying such a woman? So that's making value judgments based on Mrs. Cliff's curtains. And then on the fifth day, she looks across and the curtains are clean; they're no longer dirty. And she says, "Oh, she finally decided to wash them." And the husband says, "No, I decided to wash our windows." Right. Oh, so the reason why she was seeing her neighbor's curtains as dirty, and interpreting them as dirty, is because of this lens, right? That she was viewing them through, which is her windows, her kitchen windows. And that needed cleaning before she could have catch proper sight of her neighbor's curtains, right? So there's an object, the curtains, there's a lens through which we view the object, which is the window, the kitchen window. And then, of course, there's a distance between that object, which is the curtains, and our perspective as we view that. But then thirdly, then there's an outcome. I wonder how she's so comfortable with that. What does it say about that? So there's an outcome, there's a conclusion we draw from that interaction. That's basically hermeneutics. So I use this illustration to show you the three, three areas that are involved in hermeneutics, in interpretation, but also just to show you how ubiquitous it is. It's every day, it happens every single day.
Okay, I think that's cool how you explain it. I think even someone who doesn't actually know how this works can actually grasp what you're actually talking about. But I wanted to get to this because you bringing out something quite profound, that we all have these kind of lenses that we bring into a text, particularly the biblical text that we're actually talking about here. So on this issue of, we come 4,000 years or more after the biblical text has been formulated, and we kind of look for meaning of this text, what it means for us today. And I know you are more heavily focused on contextual interpretation, which you call it, transformational consciousness. That's what you call it.
Yeah.
Can you sort of flesh out what you mean by that, and how do we sort of mix the two in terms of meaning and actually apply it to our context today in terms and so that the text can transform us eventually?
Yeah. So, Cliff, and you'll know this, right? That the biblical text is a product of interpretation. See, it's everywhere, man. You can't do anything without interpretation, right? The biblical text is a product of interpretation from the Old Testament, scribes writing down oral traditions, earlier oral traditions, and committing them to writing. That involves a process of interpretation as well. And these are people who are basically distilling and bringing down earlier traditions to help them make sense of their present circumstances and predicament, right? And that's interpretation. Of course, then in the New Testament, you find Jesus doing the same thing, playing around and playing within, earlier traditions and the traditions of his people in order to bring about a message, to bring about transformation within his context and his surroundings. Paul picks this up again, and he does this all the time. So it's everywhere, even in the biblical text. And so what we mean by contextual biblical hermeneutics is precisely that, is when I'm faced with X, Y, and Z, because of, X, Y, and Z, or A, B, and C that's going on in my life, does the Bible have anything to say? Does the Bible offer a perspective? Does the Bible offer any insights, into what I'm going through or about what I'm going through? And the reason why that is such a very good question to ask, and that is such a relevant question to ask, as opposed to what does the text mean, or what was the author trying to do? And here's why it's so good to ask that question of what does the Bible have to say, right? As because the Bible itself is a product of that particular question. Okay. What does, this tradition, what does God have to say? What does, what is the meaning of God's acts in my life right now as recorded or captured in earlier traditions, right? So we ask the question, what does the Bible have to say? We actually desist from treating the Bible as an object that needs to be acted upon, that needs to be imposed on, that needs to be spoken to, right? As opposed to it speaking, because it is alive, it's speaking. So we then ask it, does it have anything to say? And we stand back and allow the text to speak, right? To speak, because it's a living document. It's present, and it converses with us. And so when we talk about, but what is the purpose of this? What is the purpose of this? It's not for the Bible to say, actually, this is what I mean, therefore, this is what you shall repeat and continue doing, right? Mm-hmm. It is to say, this is how I came about, right? This is what was going on. And so these are the resources that are utilized to get to this. So these are the resources that are open to you. And what that does is it results in this, it has this transformative effect of consciousness, right? So we begin to see not just the text, not the world, not even our surroundings differently, but we also begin to see ourselves differently and see others differently. So it has like implications in practice and in reality. Maybe to take you back to my illustration, Cliff, I know I promised not to give you long answers.
That's fine.
But we're talking about hermeneutics here. You
should
take this.
You go for it.
So just to give you my perspective is that when Mrs. Cliff is looking at her neighbor's curtains, right, she makes value judgments, right? So that transforms or changes the way she sees Mrs. Cliff's curtains, right? The way she sees her neighbor's curtains, how she thinks or what she thinks of her neighbor's, character and propensity for cleanliness, and even starts making assumptions about her husband, right? So she's acting on them. They haven't said anything. She hasn't allowed them to say anything, right? But what checks her hermeneutics or her interpretation is the husband who reads with her, right? And because the husband is reading from a different perspective, maybe of not being in competition with her neighbor in terms of cleanliness and whatever. So he's able to see even and engage with his lens, right, of reading. Mm. And when they both read the curtains together, he takes the step of cleaning the lens, and there's a transformation that takes place, right? Yeah. And actually, the problem is not always the dirty curtains on the other side. Sometimes it's the way I see things, I view things. So that changes. So that's what we mean by transformation of consciousness through engagement and interaction with the text.
To ensure that we keep bringing you tough conversations like these, please support our ministry by donating as little as 50 Rand per month. You can find our banking details on our website, pulusoministries.co.za. Okay,
that's kind of awesome. What I'm getting from you is that it's important for us to read text in a community, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And also what I'm picking you say is that, there's this fascination where people are so fixated on biblical exegesis to know what was the meaning of the text. But what I'm picking up is that many of us, when we read the text, we are actually doing eisegesis that we cannot run away from. So different communities throughout different generations and times are reading texts based on their context, and they're actually imposing on the text and making the text speak to them in that particular community. Am I right to say that?
Yes. So one of my favorites, you're right, we're always eisegeting, and then so that our interpretations are not challenged, we then say they're scientific, they're objective, they're exegetical. But those are sometimes the terms that not necessarily speak to the method of interpretation, but they speak to like our insecurity about our interpretation. So we try and fence them around this idea of objectivity and scientific and exegetical. You're right. So you're quite right when you point that out, that we all do eisegesis, right? We all do eisegesis, and the problem is not eisegesis. The problem is when it is not declared, i.e., when the lens has not been described, or you're not reckoned with it, you're not confronting it, you're not declaring it up front that I'm reading this text as a Black man in South Africa who is, who has undergone X, Y, and Z and operating within a context of violence and so forth.
That
and
would be
so
your lens.
when I read that,
that would be your lens to declare
that's your lens.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, that's your lens. And so as I go to the text, this is who I am, right? I'm not trying to, disrobe myself of my being. I don't think the text wants me to do that either. And so I confront and I read the text from that particular lens. And this is what I'm getting from the text, right? Because I'm reading it from this lens. Then Cliff comes and he says, I'm reading the text from this context, and this is what I'm getting from a similar text. And then someone else comes and does that reading. But what we've done in the past is that I've taken my reading and I've gone over and gone back to my community, right? Like people who are like me. And I've said, this is what I found from the Bible. And they said, yes, it resonates. That's right. That's what the Bible says, right? And then Cliff goes to his people and says, this is what I found in the text. And they say, yes, you're right, right? This is what the Bible says. But what we're saying now is let's bring Cliff, let's bring Blose, let's bring, Bota onto the table, right? With all their interpretations, let them dialogue with each other, i.e., the man who keeps grunting every time the wife complains about the windows is important, he's critical, because he serves as a mirror for us to check the blind spots in our interpretations. The most dangerous interpretations are those that happen and occur amongst like-minded people and in isolation from dissenting voices, right? So you need to place your interpretations within a theater of conversation with other perspectives, and that gives you like a clearer and more broader and fuller view of the text.
Okay, awesome. I think what you are proposing here is this contextual biblical hermeneutics, or interpretation, as you call it, in a community, as I hear you correctly. And there are benefits to it, because from what I'm deducing from you saying is that we can never run away from interpreting. All of us are essentially doing interpretation of some sort when we read, whether the Bible or a newspaper or a magazine. We are all engaged in this interpretation, and we cannot run away from it. So now, what are the benefits of this kind of interpretation in a community versus the traditional ways of interpreting scripture?
Yeah. So. How much time do we have? Because I can go the whole day with the time.
Yeah.
So when we read when we read in community, let me start with that. When we read in community, Cliff, and by the way, let me just go back and say that we talk about contextual hermeneutics. We're not saying, just do away with exegesis and do away with all these other traditional methods of understanding and reading the text, right? We need those. They need to be there, right? Because they give us insight into the world behind the text, right? And into the structure of the text, and so forth. So they bring us closer, as opposed to us standing on this window and reading through the lens to the other side. They actually try and close that gap a little bit, So they might not get us there exactly, but they try and close that gap. So they're needed. They're very much needed. So we engage with the text at close quarters, right? So those traditional.
That's what I do. I go back to those ancient readings, to understand what they would have meant at that time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why you and I are friends, right? Because then I need to say, hey, Cliff, this, I'm not getting this. Why? It doesn't make sense here. Abraham is saying the Lord will provide for himself a lamb, and then Isaac and Abraham walked together, and then again it repeats it and says, then Isaac and Abraham walked again together. There's something that's missing here and doesn't make sense. And then you tell me, oh no, the structure and word construction, and of course even the world behind where the words come from, right? The linguistics and the psychology of the language. So then I take that and I say, okay, so what are the implications of this now, right? For us now. Yeah. So I need you. I need your work. I need you to write. And that's why I'm saying it's the easy stuff. We've got you guys to do all the hard work, and we just take it and knit it together and then say, this is what the Bible means. So, and of course it's a community thing, right? So I can't be an all-rounder. So I need people with different skills and different specialities. We've been doing this for a long time as Bible scholars, right? And so even within interpretation, we're realizing that this needs to be open, the space needs to be opened up where it's done in community. So what are the benefits of doing that, right? I then stop reading the Bible in a way that favors me, right? In a way that condones my, or rather, I stop silencing the Bible from speaking directly to my privilege, from speaking directly to my, as a man, Black man in South Africa. So I stop silencing the Bible when it speaks things to me that show my toxicity and how violent I am against others, especially women, children, members of the LGBTIQ community. When we read the Bible in community, so those are the blind spots we're checking that, hey, your interpretation is harmful to these people, right? It might favor you, it might, condone what you're all about, but it comes at a cost of other people's dignity, right? And so, but I'll never know that until those people read the same text and say, hang on, no, that's not what it's saying. You're reading that into the text. One of my favorite examples, Cliff, maybe I'll share this with you, is when I engaged a feminist reading of John chapter 4. You'll know that. Woman at the well. Yeah. You know, we've always read that story about, she was loose and then she saw Jesus and she was like, what a young man, and then that's why she waited 3, because everyone else was away from her, and trying to keep her. But there's so many other reasons behind why she went to the well at 3 p.m., after her ritual bath, in the afternoon. There's so many other reasons why she went there, but we always chose the one that made her appear as loose, and obviously because she was isolated and ostracized by her community. But then you also find her engaging with Jesus in the text. She's engaging with Jesus and she goes toe to toe with him. Now, initially we thought that Jesus was there to evangelize her and teach her, right? Yeah. But no, they're at a well. That's a place where, the teachers of a village meet, the men of the village meet and exchange, wisdom nuggets, right? Yeah. So Jesus is not there to preach to this woman. He's not even there to teach her, which is also unheard of during this time, right? That a rabbi would have a female disciple. He's there to engage with her. These are 2 equals, 2 rabbis talking together, right? And you see it in the text, but I never see it when I read it as a man, because I just don't think a woman can have anything to say to Jesus, but she engages him. She goes toe to toe with him, theologically, history, and the politics of the time. But we've always read her as loose and as, rejected by her community. But then you have to reckon with this question. She then runs back to the village and she says, come see a man, right? And nobody says, oh, there she goes again with another man. Everyone comes out and be like, huh? So somehow her testimony, her witness is not shrouded behind this idea of a loose character, right? Within the text itself, right? So she comes out and everyone follows her and believes and takes her at her word. But I would never have come to that realization if I continued reading that text amongst like-minded people, i.e. men. It takes a female feminist voice to read the text and then say, hang on, here are things that are, you guys are missing, and they're in the text, and here are things you're imposing on the text. And then you're like, oh, okay, so I need to step back, check myself before I wreck myself, so to speak, and before I wreck others, because this thing has been, is preached and it's taught across pulpits and, seminaries as is, but to the detriment and to the demise of the dignity of certain other groupings. So that's the importance of reading in community.
Oh, that's cool. I like that, because, a lot of these interpretations, you often hear them on the pulpit, and many of them think it's what is in the text. But when you read the text itself, you don't actually see what has been said on the pulpit. But then again, it drives us to another point where people get this objectivity to say their interpretation is the correct one. What are the dangers of that, being objective about a particular reading of a text?
Right. So one of the clearest one, and maybe and I know we've spoken about this one, is that objectivity is finality. Right? There's a certain finality to objectivity. So once I say this is objective, this is scientific, it's inerrant. There's that word again. I want us to get into it. It's inerrant. This is a perfect interpretation, which doesn't exist, by the way. So this is a perfect interpretation, right? An absolute interpretation. What that does is that if you make that discovery or you make that declaration of that interpretation being objective in 1899, right? Generations that come after that can't challenge the veracity or can't even question the veracity of that interpretation. They go with it. So what it means is that the Bible from 1899 has been saying the same thing.
It's fixed, yeah. It becomes fixed.
It's fixed. Yeah. So that's the problem with objectivism, right? That it calcifies and ossifies and basically traps the Bible within a particular historical epoch, that it can't say and speak, meaningfully, prophetically, and transformatively, in every single context through the ages, right? But instead it keeps echoing and saying the same thing over and over and over again, like a broken record. Okay. And so that's the problem with objectivism, right? And absolutism. So what we're saying is that so it's not so, and that on its own, by the way, is anti-Bible, because the Bible itself presents itself as a speaking document, yes, as a living document, but importantly, when we say that we disrobe ourselves or displace or remove the idea of objectivism or dismantle the idea of objectivism and absolutism, we're not introducing subjectivism, as others would call it, but what we're saying is we are removing this idea of dominating the text and speaking over the text. So we remove ourselves and allow the text to speak. We allow the text to live. We allow the text to breathe, yes, breathe like the ruach, not just breathe, but to breathe, the ruach, and let the word speak over, the darkness and over the formlessness of our various contexts.
What I'm hearing you say, Blose, it's quite profound, because I know from a Jewish perspective is that Jewish readers, kids from a young age are taught the Bible, but soon after that they're introduced to these multiple perspectives that the Bible, interpretations emanate from their rabbis from over the years, and they embrace this multiple perspectivism that the biblical text brings across. I mean, there's a saying in one of the literatures, the Jewish Talmud, that says the Torah has many faces, which means which means in a particular text within the Bible itself, you have multiple interpretations that you can draw from that. And I find that to be something more healthier and more engaging and more open, and makes the text to be more dynamic instead of locking it to this one type of meaning that people tend to lean towards.
Yeah. I mean, isn't that what Jesus is doing in the New Testament? Of course, I know you spoke about the Old Testament, but Jesus is doing exactly that in the New Testament, adding a perspective to an earlier tradition which has been interpreted and reinterpreted, right? You have heard it being said, but I say, he's engaging with that tradition of multiple perspectives. I'm here to add a perspective, and it's acceptable because it's the culture, it's a norm, right? Everyone is doing it. So within that setting, so teacher, tell us, right? So now we're checking your interpretation, we're checking your reading. Moses says, but Caesar says, right? So in other words, you are saying, so there's your poll, the text says, and the context demands, right? You see that?
Yes,
See what I just did there, right? Yeah. So you are saying this is your interpretation, that's the outcome. The text said, and the context demands. So do you have a room to revise your interpretation? Do you have room to sort of restate your interpretation? Of course, Jesus does this all the time, eloquently, if I may say so, without being biased. Of course, I say this with the objectivity of a scholar. So, and of course, he indulges in these readings and in this discourse, right? Because it's part of a tradition that is happening. We add and we bring our perspectives, we bring our different interpretations, and they dialogue with each other, and we see what implications this has for our context. You and I have been reading Riza Aslan's the Life and Times of Zealot, right? The life and times of Jesus of Nazareth. And we I mean, you'll see how he beautifully, locates Jesus within that, historical epoch of Roman imperialism, and how Jesus is engaging with that context. So, and how Jesus reads the text from his own tradition in order to engage and to speak to that context, sometimes even in a very revolutionary manner. And of course, when we come after, we read Jesus and interpret Jesus and then neuter him to not speak so violently against imperialism, because we stand on the shoulders of the empire, right?
Yes,
and we benefit from the exploits and of the empire, or a particular empire. So we neuter Jesus here and there, make him a pacifist, and then declare those readings as objective. But they are far removed from even the context that produced them, right? So Jesus starts speaking univocally, but he was speaking in a very multivocal context.
Yeah. I see a benefit there, an interrelationship between the older ways of reading the text and also the new ways of reading the text, because we're not saying, as to what I think you are saying, that we're not chucking out all those older traditions of interpreting the Bible, but we are actually using them to arrive at where we are and looking at our context and reinterpreting some of those texts that were read earlier in a community. I say again, as you rightly pointed out, that we can sort of climb on the shoulders of these giants that have come before us and have landed us at a certain point to be able to look at this text afresh in a community. I think that.
So what we're saying is, we're saying that centricism, right, or that is caused by objectivism. So that is like declaring my perspective as universal, right, and as all encompassing. So I read from a particular tradition and I say, this is how the text should be read and approached, right? That is the problem. So what we're saying is that all perspectives are relevant. All perspectives are valid. That's the point. All perspectives are valid. So there shouldn't be one that stands, even when we talk about the idea of tradition, right, as a representative of this of a tradition or reading tradition. We're saying these are multiple traditions. They're all speaking, to a similar text, and they're all hearing different things, right? And so what we do is that they create this orchestra, right? Or what we call contrapuntalism. So what they do is that they create the sound of notes playing against each other, but it produces a nice sound. So all these perspectives start, sharpening each other. Iron sharpens iron, and they start speaking to each other, not against each other, but they start, bumping against each other and speaking to each other, and then makes a sound, right? And the sound is, hey, check yourself, right? You are producing knowledge that is harmful. Check yourself. You are producing a knowledge that is, not a true reflection of the text. Hey, check yourself. You're silencing the Bible and you're speaking over it. But this doesn't happen when we are in the company of like-minded readers. It happens when we are. It's also, check yourself. You are now, silencing and neutering the Bible from speaking to, current and modern evils, in a very prophetic and in a very confrontational manner. So we'll always try and sort of silence those parts of the Bible that upset the establishment, right? So, but when you get people who are victims of the establishment reading the text, then they're able to say, hey, actually, you're silencing the text, your reading is flawed in X, Y, and Z, but you do make a good point in A, B, and C.
Yeah. I think that was very refreshing, Blose. And unfortunately, I think that's all we have time for this episode. Yeah, so I'm sure we're going to have another one soon. Then our viewers, I'm sure they're going to like what we're going to come up with next. So I appreciate your time, that you have taken to come out and chat to us. And I know we have the luxury of chatting on the side, without our audience involved. But thank you anyway for coming through to speak on Blose Ministries. And
thanks for having me, Cliff.
Yeah, and to our viewers at home, if you've liked this episode, keep on liking us and clicking that subscription button on our YouTube channel, and we'll be bringing you these powerful chats as we go through and ensure that we bring you the answers that you may be looking for. Sometimes, unfortunately, we don't have the answers that you may be looking for, but at least we start the conversations. Thank you very much and stay tuned. Bye-bye. Blose Ministries is a non-profit educational enterprise founded in 2019. The ministry is informed by academic scholarship. At Blose, we embrace multiple perspectives in our engagement with Scripture. We seek to provide non-Christians and Christians from all backgrounds and denominations with resources that provide an honest intellectual engagement with the Bible. We embrace multiple perspectives in fostering a more open, moderate society into the 21st century and beyond.
To ensure that we keep bringing you tough conversations like these, please support our ministry by donating as little as 50 Rand per month. You can find our banking details on our website, pulusoministries.co.za.